Someone cried out. Pedro was moving like the wind. Wondered if if he would be able to keep up. Already he had discovered something he had suspected all along. It was almost impossible to run in Cusco. The air was too thin. He couldn't have been going for more than half a minute, and his head was pounding. His throat was sore, and he felt as though he was about to faint. He forced himself on, not well, wanting to be left behind. Pedro was one of the five. Matt couldn't lose him now. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, 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 him. But Pedro was looking out for Matt. As a policeman swung around the corner, he shouted out a warning. Matt ducked low. There was an explosion, and one of the stone steps spat dust. They were shouting at him. Matt felt a tremor of disbelief. Rodriguez had given orders to take him, dead or alive. The gunshot had been a mistake. Now everyone in the square was panicking and running in all directions, desperate to get away. For a moment, the police found themselves powerless. The boys were out of sight. Then something strange happened. The policeman who had fired the shot threw himself backwards and lay sprawling. Matt twisted around and saw that the slingshot was in Pedro's hand. He certainly knew how to use it. The policeman had been standing in front of a road that was otherwise unguarded. Matt forced some air into his lungs and set off out of sight. That was the key. Matt knew they had to get under cover. They had to find somewhere to hide, give them a bit of time, and maybe they could work out what to do next. Pedro ran through an open gateway leading off the street, signalling at Matt to follow Matt. Did just that and found himself in a rough courtyard with patches of grass growing through the rubble and the dust. There was another market, here stalls lit by oil lamps stood applauded against the walls. They were open even at this time of the evening, and a few backpackers were wandering idle between them, examining the hats and ponchos, rugs, beads and bags on sale. The great mass of the cathedral rose up behind. The two boys didn't stop. They come to a second archway and bust out to find themselves in another street, but this time they were not alone. A very old Indian woman sat facing them, squatting on the pavement, with a little pile of handmade jewellery. Her hair hung down in two long pigtails, and there was a baby wrapped in a striped blanket. Nestling against her chest, she was looking straight at them as they stood there, painting, wondering which way to go. She suddenly smiled, showing yellow teeth that were little more than stumps. At the same time, she pointed towards an alleyway that led off behind her. Matt wasn't sure what to do. The old woman was behaving as if she knew them. It was almost as if she had been sitting there all evening, waiting for them to come so she could point out the best way. Matt thought, to get more air into his system, and to keep the dizziness at bay. "Which way?" he shouted at Pedro. The old woman raised a finger to her lips. This was no time for a decision. Once again she pointed the way back behind them. They had shouting. The police had entered the marketplace. Grocer's Pedro muttered he had decided to believe her. The two of them ran up the alleyway, disappearing into the shadows that pushed in from both sides. Tattered posters hung on the walls, and wooden balconies jutted out over their hands. The street was cobbled, and Matt's rubber sandals were almost torn off his feet as he tried to run. But was it worth going on? Matt could hear sirens and whistles echoing all over the city, and with a heavy heart he knew that he and Pedro were never going to get out of this, no matter how fast they ran. They were two rats in a maze. They could scurry around the streets and passengers of Cusco until they were exhausted, or they could find a building to hide. Passengers until they exhausted, or they could find a building to hide in. But it would make no difference. It might take the police all night to find them, but they would do it in the end. Cusco was surrounded by mountains. There was no way out. Somewhere just out of sight another car pulled up, boots stamped down on concrete, a whistle blew. Even Pedro was beginning to slow down. Sweat was dripping off his face. It would all be over very soon. The alleyways led to another narrow street with T-junction at one end. Pedro started towards it, but almost at once a blue van came skidding to a halt, and there, and their policeman piled out. One of them shouted exultantly into a radio, while the other two took out their guns and began moving towards them. Matt didn't have the strength to move his heart and was about to burst. He could only watch as the two men approached, and then it happened again. Another Indian appeared, stepping out of the doorway, pushing a heavy cart laden with food and drink. He was wearing white trousers and a dark jacket, but no shirt, nor did he have any shoes. Long hair hung down, obscuring most of his face. He stopped in the road, completely blocking it, and it seemed to Matt that he had acted quite deliberately. He had known they had come and wanted to give them more time. The policeman began shouting. One of them was trying to push past. The Indian nodded and smiled at the two boys with rewounded strength. They set off the other way. Something was happening in Cusco. Someone was trying to help them. First it had been the old woman, now it was the food seller. But who were they? How had they even known that Pedro was there? Matt wondered if he was imagining things, and no matter how many people tried to help them, he still couldn't see how they were going to get away. They turned another corner, and suddenly Matt knew where they were. That this was one of the most famous streets in the city. Just a few hours earlier, it had been filled with tourist groups and guides. Now it was completely empty, lit only by the glow from the sky. One side of the street was lined by old Insia walls, 10 meters high. Matt recognized the huge stones slotted so inglesly together. Pedro was leaning against one of them, painting for breath. Which way? Matt asked. Pedro struggled. Either he was too exhausted to talk, or he had come to the same conclusion as Matt. There was no way out, so it didn't matter where they went. They started forward, slowly making their way down the desert street. They could hear shouting all around them, disembodied voices fitting like night creatures everywhere. Only one thing was certain. Their presses were getting closer all the time, and the streets led nowhere. It was blocked by a tall metal gate that had been swung across end and locked. There was no way Matt could hear footsteps rushing up behind them and know that the police were only seconds away. He no longer had the heart to run or to hide. He reached out and rattled the gate. It was too high to climb. Pedro had given up too. He was looking angry and exhausted. The bitterness of defeat obviously in his eyes. Among us, the voice come from just behind them. Matt turned. Incredible. There was a young man standing in the street just a couple of meters away. He was wearing a red and mauve poncho, jeans, and a woven hat that had flaps hanging down over his ears. It seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, and Matt was sure he known him for a strange, unrevealing moment. He was sure it was Mikas, but Mikas was dead. So, oh, amigos, the man repeated. Come quickly, amigos. It was the one word of Spanish that Matt knew. Friends, the man gestured. Matt looked past him and saw an incredible sight. Part of the wall had swung open, revealing a secret door. With at least 7 sides, it was impossible to imagine the hinge mechanism that had made it work, but when the door was closed, it would be completely invisible. Matt and Pedro had just walked past it without realizing it was there. Millions of tourists must have done the same. Matt took a step forward. There was a passenger inside the wall. He could just make out a narrow corridor, but it ended almost at once in total blackness. No, Pedro shook his head. He was afraid. The man spoke to him quietly and quickly in Spanish, then turned back to Matt. The police will be here very soon, he said. If you want to live, you must trust me. Come on. Come now. Who are you? Matt asked. The man made no reply, and Matt understood he wasn't prepared to talk about this. Not now. An amazing secret. This hidden door had been revealed to them. It had to be closed before the police or anyone else saw it. Pedro was looking at him, waiting for him to make a decision. Matt nodded. The two of them stepped inside the wall. The man followed. The door swung shut behind them. Blackness. Matt couldn't hear anything apart from the sound of his own breathing. He stood in pitch darkness, and it occurred to him that he could have died. The death might not be so different from this. He had been cut off from the city of Cusco. The moment the wall closed, there was a slight dampness in the air that clung to his skin, but apart from that he felt nothing. He had to force himself not to panic, to avoid the thought that he might just have been burned alive. Then the man in the poncho turned on an electric torch, and the light sprang out to reveal a narrow corridor with a staircase leading down. They were inside the wall. The great stories were on both sides. Where did the steps lead? Matt couldn't even begin to guess. The light also showed the face of a man who had come to their rescue. Matt had only glimpsed him in the street, and the ear flaps of his hat had concealed much of his face. Looking at him more closely, he saw that he did bear a very close resemblance to Mikos, although without the scare. He was also slightly thinner, with a narrow chin and the begin the beginnings of a beard. He couldn't have been more than 20 or 23 years old. "Who are you?" Matt asked. Again he wondered. It is his voice. Would you carry out in the streets? But that was impossible. The walls were at least a meter thick. "My name is Atok," the man replied. His accent was strength. There was a hint Spanish in it, but also something else, some sort of negative Indian. Atok was the name that Mikas had spoken just before he died. He had wanted to get a message to this man. His brother Matt hoped not, but that would explain why they looked so alike. What is this place? He asked. It's an old Inca passage, very secret, very few people know. Where does it lead? I take you somewhere safe, where Salamander can't find you. There are friends waiting, but it is far, and there is still much danger. Police looking everywhere. We can't talk now. Hartog turned to Pedro and spoke briefly in Spanish once again to Matthias. Its accent sounded strange. Presumably he was translating what he had just said. Pedro nodded. A decision had been made. This way, Tonic Artok said. He swung the light at the stairs. We go down. It will be easier soon. We can be better with not this way. Tonic he swung the lights up the stairs. We go down. It will be easier soon. They began to climb down. Matt tried to count the steps, but after 25 he gave up. The walls were very narrow, passing in on them from both sides, and he could feel the weight of the earth pushing down from above. There was a heaviness in his ears, and the air was getting cold. He could only see a few steps at a time. The torch wasn't powerful enough to light much more, but as they reached the bottom, with a second passageway bending around ahead of them, he became aware of strange yellow glows coming from somewhere just out of sight. They began to walk forward, and soon Atok switched off the torch. The only head was it lit, but not by an electric light. Matt turned the corner and gasped. The passage ran on for as far as it could see, with flames burning in a small silver cups set into the walls about 20 meters apart. They must have been fed by a hidden oil supply, but it was the walls themselves that caught the light. Magical field it had reflected it back. The walls were lined with streaks of what looked like brass, but Matt somehow know were actually solid gold. How much gold was there in the world? Matt had always thought it was precious because it was rare, and he remembered what he had heard outside the temple of Coricansus. Con- the Spanish conquistadors had looted the city. They had been mad with greed. They had taken all the gold they could lay their hands on, or what, or that was what they had thought. But now he could see that they had found only a fraction of what was there. Tons and tons of it must have been used to make this incredible route far below the city. It far below the city it was stretching ever further into the distance, picking up the light from the lamps, turning night into day. They were not entered to make the journey on foot. Another Indian dressed like Atok was waiting for them with four mules. Matt wondered how the animals could bear to be here so far underground, but he supposed they must be used to it. The Indian bowed as he approached. Matt smiled, feeling increasingly uneasy. "Please, we must hurry," Atomic said. Matt and Pedro climbed on to the first two mules. Atok and the Indian took the two behind. There were no saddies, just bright-coloured blankets tied underneath. Matt had never ridden an animal in his life, and wondered how he was meant to make this one go, but the mules know what it was doing. The moment all four of them had set off at a fast pace. It oozed thundering rhythmically on the soft earth-covered floor. One after another, the flickering oil lamps littered their progress. Nobody spoke. Matt noticed that some of the gold panels had design beaten into them, faces and warriors, figure bristling with weapons. After a while, the passengers widened and they passed cautiously, treasures lined up against the walls, jars and pictures, cups and trays, hideous and funeral masks, many of them made of silver and gold. He wondered how long it would take them to reach whatever they were going. The fact that he had no idea of their destination only made the journey seem longer, and it was almost impossible to measure the passing of time. All he knew was that they were climbing. The path had been sloping upward almost from the start, but he was surely they were getting no closer to the surface, so they must be heading out of Cusco into the mountains. That was the only possible explanation. After at least 1 hour, and possible as much as 2 days, Subscribe, hit the bell, share, like, thank you. Click on my end screen and thumbnail, please. Watch my videos from start. Watch my live stream from start to finish. Click on my thumbnail. Click on my thumbnail tab, please. Watch my videos from start to finish. Subscribe, hit the bell, share, like, thank you.